Okay? Do this for me. Say amen. Oh, that sounds halfway good. Give me another amen. Now this time, say it like you want the world to know it. Amen.
People, their dreams and hard work. These are some of the elements that helped to make Waterbury, Connecticut the city it is today. Young, determined, and unafraid of work, they found jobs, built churches, homes, businesses, community centers, and social clubs where people could meet and celebrate with one another. They created neighborhoods that were communities of cultures. What is their legacy? Mount Olive African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church was founded, constructed, and dedicated in 1883 by a small congregation of 150 African Americans. For many people, the church meant stability, a rooted starting point toward progress. It was the center of all things to come. It was the beginning of their community. In the 1880s, there were very few people of color in Waterbury, but change was inevitable, including what we call ourselves from one generation to the next, or what others have called us: colored, Negro, Black, Afro-American, or African American. What a proud and beautiful race of people we are. The church was a very important part of one's life in those days. It was a safe haven, a place to meet others with the same outlook or dreams, a place to socialize with families of similar history and values. It was home. Spirituality was part of one's character. No matter how far from home you were, the church made sure you were never alone. In the early 1900s, a great migration of African Americans arrived in Waterbury. Many of them had been working on farms or as domestics in the South. Some were professionals of one sort or another, but each of them had a common goal: to make a better life for themselves and their families. Curious and adventurous by turns, they each embarked on their own journey. Let us learn how these pioneers helped shape the Waterbury we know today. Waterbury was quite a place, a lot different than it is now. People came to Waterbury from all over. Many came from the South during the Great Migration. Hilda Burke spent most of her life in Waterbury. She describes her childhood.
I lived in Waterbury since 1922, 6 months old, and my family came here. The rest of my family came here, even though a year before my father had come to get a job. And we've been surviving ever since. My brother started school in Slocum. We were in that Polish area then. And then we moved over to Grove Street area, which was Italian. And then we went up there to Hill Street, which was still Italian. And you learn how to say some of the Italian words and whatnot. And through my high school, we were living back on Cook Street. Integrated neighborhood. Oh, the families, the grown-ups got along very well together. It was the children. You have these skirmishes and whatnot. Next day you get over it and go on about your business. Our family went to the AME Zion Methodist Church, which is still on Pearl Street. There was an older church, and I think it's about 27 years old now, the new church. But the old church we grew up into was a little straight, what do they call them, like Quaker houses. That brook up there in Fulton Park at the entrance, that flowed down, it originally flowed down the middle of Pearl Street, but they rerouted it and it went under buildings. And it went under our church, and you could go to the men's room, and you could see the water running because they had it bricked in. You could see the water running underneath. The first AME Zion Church was on South Main Street. And when they got ready to build this new church, no one wanted to leave Pearl Street. They had ideas of going different parts of the city, but no one wanted to leave, and so that's why they tore it down and built right there on the spot.
All the people who were interviewed have a common thread, the pursuit of a better life. Some had families that migrated to Waterbury. Others were born here. But all of them helped to create a community of churches, businesses, and neighborhoods. Waterbury was known as the Brass City. The town had many factories devoted to casting and milling brass. 3 of the largest were American Brass, Chase Brass and Copper, and Scoville Manufacturing. News traveled fast in the early 1900s, even though it was mainly by word of mouth. One person telling the next where good jobs and better wages could be found, and more importantly, who was hiring. George Ward grew up in the South with his family. His father hired him out to other farmers to work the land. He would soon find his way to Waterbury.
Left Haverstraw, New York, with a friend of mine that was working in the kitchen, and he had accepted the job that he said we could work all the year round without having to work outside. Well, I had a job when I left Haverstraw with this friend of mine. The 2 of us preparing to work for Scoville Manufacturing Company. When we got off the train, we walked up to Scoville Manufacturing Company and received this job.
Like George Ward, Addie Harrison Booker came to Waterbury by train in search of a better life. She remembers what it was like to be an African American in the Brass City.
I was born in Bennettsville, South Carolina, best town in Dixie. I came to Waterbury on the train. My father wanted me to come to Waterbury to see what happened to my brother. He didn't call, and he didn't write. So I came to Waterbury. It was so nice. I stayed. I got a job in Cheshire, and I worked there for $10 a week with the Goddards. And it was so nice. See, down south, we used to plow the fields. And when I went to the Goddards, they had a plow with a wheel on it. So I plowed their garden, I washed the cars, I did everything because that's the way we did in South Carolina. I came to Waterbury at 17. I lived at my aunt, Julia Cobb's 75 Hill Street. It was an apartment house, but I lived with my aunt, and the apartment house was so nice, they didn't have us in one corner. We lived, white and black was at 75 Hill Street, and we all got along like family. When I came to Waterbury, it was so nice. Everybody was nice. You didn't know you were black until you look at your hands, and it was just so nice. But now, Waterbury moved down south, and the South came here, because now the South is much better than Waterbury. When I lived down south, there was the Ku Klux Klans, and we couldn't go uptown because my father was afraid for us to go. And we couldn't stay up there no longer than they had a curfew at 5 o'clock, and we could not be seen uptown after 5. And then down there, we couldn't go in the swimming pool unless where the white went. We couldn't go in the theaters. And if we had a little rope, just a little thing, we could stay in that rope. And if they had a black dog, they bathed him in that little rope where we were. But Jim Crow means you couldn't go in anything. They didn't say like they do here, everything's changed. They says now was segregated. And there, they always say we were Jim Crow. We couldn't eat in the white restaurant. If we went there, we'd have to eat outside. They would, we couldn't go in there. So that's why it was Jim Crow. And really, we couldn't go anywhere, and we were Jim Crow.
Earl Hunter Sr., a Waterbury native, talks about his first jobs in Waterbury.
I was born in Waterbury in 1907. When I first started working, I used to work in one of the largest clothing stores here. I used to be a receiving clerk when I was younger, And from there, I worked with them until one of them went out, Then my father got me a job in the shop where he was working. See, there was 3 shops, the American Brass, Scoville's, and Chase Manufacturing Company. Them are the 3. That's what they call the brass city of the world. Well, I had a pretty good job, and I worked myself up until I finally become a foreman of the job I was on, because I was anxious, So the foreman, my foreman, he says, I used to watch him, all the time. He says, you're weighing up the metal to go out, He says, do you want to learn? I said, yeah. So I learned. So when that foreman was out, the head superintendent, he said, who we going to put on the job? And so the assistant superintendent said, Earl knows it. So finally, 15 or 20 minutes later, the assistant superintendent came to me. He said, okay, Earl, go up and change your clothes and take over.
During World War II, our men were drafted into the service, and many factory jobs were filled by women. It was a new age. Women were being hired and earning wages they had never earned before. Carolene Harvey Watts came to Waterbury at the age of 12. She describes Waterbury during World War II.
During the war, the NAACP, which was here in Waterbury at that time, because the NAACP was started in 1942 by Dr. James Lee. In that time, no black women were allowed to work in the factories. In years after that, of course, the NAACP and other groups decided that we were going to have opportunities in all types of fields. And so someone came in here for teaching, someone came in here from principals of schools and different things like that. So the barriers were broken down, I would say, to a certain extent. They still exist. But as far as Waterbury was concerned, everything that happened here in Waterbury was handled at that time by what they call the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which is NAACP, and we would immediately fight discrimination, although it still exists. I remained president for almost 10 years of the Waterbury branch NAACP, and my biggest fight at that time was police brutality.
Catherine L. Craig Smith discusses factories and their wages.
When I finished school, I went to work in Benrus factory, which was on Cherry Avenue, I think it is. And then from there, I worked in the undergarment, and from there I worked in U.S. Time. I got laid off. We got laid off at U.S. Time because they closed the factory down on South Main Street. Then I went to Burke Manufactory, and I worked there for like 26 years. They changed Burke into Burndy. So I retired from Burndy Manufactory in 1992. When I got hired at Burke, they were only paying like $2.50 an hour, something like that. I'm serious. And this was, I can't think, I was there 26 years, so you go back some few years. And at that particular time, when you did get a raise, it was like a nickel, maybe a year, maybe a year and a half. So when I left, when I retired, really I was getting like $7 an hour. And it took that long to get to $7 an hour, you see. So they weren't paying, the wages weren't good. But at that particular time, you could make a living on the wages because prices weren't as high as they are now. The cost of living was not high, and rents were not high. Now they're rocketing.
Margaret Moore opened one of the first Black-owned businesses. She describes her experiences in Waterbury.
My first time I came to Waterbury was in 1934, the year after my mother died. Well, I was just in the factory until 1945 when the war was over. After the war was over, I proceeded to open my own business as a seamstress. I opened my business on the corner of Vine Street, 19 Vine Street, and I was there for 6 years. I did all kinds of repairs, dressmaking, drapers, slipcovers, and after that, having trouble getting people that would work with honesty and want to do the right thing, I moved my business back home. I eventually met and did work for an interior decorator that worked out of New York. And she had a Southbury home also. So she had me, her daughter, in fact, printed and manufactured this particular chintz. And she had me to complete her house, dining room, living room, and whatnot, all in this chintz. And it was called the House of Chintz. And that was my work. That was the first time that my work was put in House Beautiful. 20 years later, I did a job in Washington, Connecticut, for John Brewer. And again, my work was in House Beautiful. Well, I was the first businesswoman, Black businesswoman, excluding Mrs. Wyrick in the city of Waterbury.
Waterbury was well on its way with neighborhoods flourishing and Black-owned businesses thriving. People depended on each other to be good neighbors. Everyone participated in the making of a community. The Rhinehart Pharmacy in Waterbury had its first Black female pharmacist, Marietta Rhinehart. They also owned the Rhinehart Trucking Company. There were a number of Black-owned businesses on Bishop Street: the Little Apple Club and the Dining Room, Grady's Barber Shop. Jesse and George Mitchell owned an ice cream parlor. On North Main Street, there was Willie Parker's Barber Shop, Harold's and Smith's Restaurants, and Mac Jones's Tea Room. He also had a laundry. At the corner of Cherry and Vine Streets, Daniel Webster Trotman and Essie Mae Trotman owned a restaurant. Waterbury had its own Black undertaker, Mac Keys. Word has it he was the richest Black man in town. On arriving in Waterbury, most folks, if they weren't staying with an aunt or an uncle or a cousin, were staying at a rooming house on Vine Street or at Mrs. Rose's on Pearl Street. Once you had a place to stay, finding a church was next most important. There you could meet people and find out all you needed to know. Most of all, you would be welcomed. There was Grace Baptist with Reverend Isaac Reed, Zion Baptist on Hawkins Street with Reverend Clem Harvey, and Mount Olive AME Zion Church. Maydie Chapman Rhinehart came to Waterbury at the age of 4. As a young woman, she became active in many clubs, including the NAACP and the Zenith Club. She remembers what it was like.
When I was growing up, everybody was more friendlier. And when you had, say like if a person had children and your neighbor would more or less take care of them if you worked or had to go someplace, a doctor, or it was more like everything was more family. Now, as it is at the present, I mean, some people live near their neighbors and don't even know who they are or don't even visit. Everybody now is in their own little cocoon, as I could put it, or in their, to their self. And that makes the difference now. And then at that time, you could go out, leave your door open and whatnot. Now you can't even go to the store without wondering whether somebody else is in your house when you get there, you know. So that there's a lot of difference now. People are more friendlier and more into, you know, family. And saying about the difference, maybe why I didn't see that much segregation, I mean, I knew there was a segregation, I'll put it like that. But when you stay in your, say like in your section, then that's all you interested in. But I know that like at that time, down on South Main Street, there were more, the French people more or less lived. Up north end, well, there was Italians and the blacks, more blacks lived up on the north end. And out on East Main Street, there was more of the Irish at that time, you know. There was discrimination, I guess, with the grown-ups. They knew more about it than the children, I'll put it like that. I mean, because the kids, the children, they've got to fight, and then one called them a name or something. They just fought it out, and that was it, you know. And then they would come home hugging one another, because we lived near Italians, and we would get to fighting. The mother would come out there and holler at her child and whatnot, and make him stop fighting. And another thing, we have lived where when my mother went to work, this Italian lady would give us our lunch and everything until my mother came home. My mother would take her lunch. We were all family at that, and in your group, you know. So that's the way that was. The city would have block dances on weekends, and they would block off the street in different sections, from some Pearl Street or North Main Street or South, even down, some of them, they have them down South Main, you know. And so all the young ladies and gentlemen and children would gather and dance. Different ones would play.
Another way for people to network was through the many clubs and organizations. Some were social, while others provided leadership for addressing important issues of equality.
The Zenith Club was more of a social club, and we were involved in more or less giving dance affairs or dinners or social things. We were the first black to have a dinner dance, a dance at the Elton Hotel and at the Waterbury Women's Club. All our affairs were strictly formal, and we always had a big crowd.
Another member of the community who took advantage of the many opportunities that Waterbury had to offer is Kay Wyrick.
In the beginning, in my young age, I joined the Elks. That's the Black Elks Club, IBPOE of W. They have an auxiliary of women, and we call the Daughter Elks. And I was in the Black Republican Club. I was in clubs up at Pearl Street Neighborhood House. And I was a big member of the NAACP.
Theodore W. Hatcher remembers his experiences with Pearl Street Neighborhood House and the Meteor Club.
I'm basically a Mason. I held offices in Kellogg Lodge, number 5. I held quite a few offices up to the point of being worshipful master. One of the things that made my fraternal operation very easy was the fact that my wife became interested in the Order of Eastern Star. Viola eventually became Grand Worthy Matron. Pearl Street was a very key part of the black community. That's where, if you couldn't meet anyplace else, you could meet at the Pearl Street Neighborhood House. This is Lila T. Alexander, formed the Pearl Street Neighborhood House. As a result of her activities during World War II, black women were able to get work in the factories as a result of her activities, no one else's. So she was a very key, she and the Pearl Street Neighborhood House was very key to the peace and comfort of the black community in Waterbury. The Meteors organization, we were an athletic club basically, but we were a community club as well. And of course, our primary interest at that time was baseball and basketball. The Meteor Club gave every New Year's Eve, we had New Year's Eve dance at the Pearl Street Neighborhood House. And our duties as meteors was not to dance, but to patrol the floor, make sure the gentlemen removed their hats and behaved themselves.
The many strides that were made in Waterbury brought a sense of pride to the African American community. There were doctors, nurses, and police officers who represented change. Dr. Theodore Lovelace arrived in Waterbury during the Depression. Hilda Petaway Burke remembers Dr. Fraser Whittington.
Dr. Whittington, as far as I know, he was the first. Now, I don't know of any other. And he would go from home to home taking care of people. And he used to come around. First, I can remember the horse and buggy. He had one of those. But he was a good doctor. He doctored the black neighborhood.
Mrs. Dorothy Arrington was the first black registered nurse to work at Waterbury Hospital. Lila Alexander organized the first programs of the Pearl Street Neighborhood House, which benefited many young people. Cicero Booker was Waterbury's first black police officer. Addie Harrison Booker speaks about her family.
They called us pioneers. My husband was the first Afro-American policeman in Waterbury. He made Waterbury history, and now he's in the Hall of Fame, and is the first black woman principal in Waterbury. She's in Waterbury history. And Cicero Booker, he retired lieutenant. That's Cicero Booker Jr.
The many people living here and those who migrated to Waterbury shared common threads. In this town, with great determination, they were able to accomplish great things. Education, the basis of many hopes and dreams, was important to every household. The schools Driggs, Bishop, Croft, Walsh, Webster, Wilby, and Crosby High School were community building blocks. They helped to create a sense of pride for the entire community.
Give me another amen. Amen. Now this time, say it like you want the world to know it. Amen. Amen.
I would like for them to remember me as a person who was concerned with the youth, and she stuck by her gun, working with youth. And I love senior citizens, don't get me wrong, but I love the challenge of teenagers, because when they think they got me, and I let loose, they say, oh my God, where did that old lady come from?
I am very concerned about the lost generation of young men. And whenever I have served on scholarship committees, I've always appreciated the fact when a young man showed the value of education and who have accomplished a great deal in their short life. And I would like to see a Waterbury that has been able to save these young men from themselves. You can accomplish anything that you feel you want to accomplish if you will just apply yourself.
I came to Waterbury in 1943. When I came, I said I would never stay here. But it's 1998 and I'm still here, so that accounts for something. I have been able to make a good living. I have been treated well by everyone. I try to, the way I treat others, I can't complain about how I have been treated. And I'm thankful, and it takes a whole city to make things better.
Our journey with these citizens of Waterbury has shown us a strong foundation on which to build our own future. How will we pursue a better life? We must remember, every city builds on its past.
Go down on my knees. I'm going home.